Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to today's webinar, Moving Towards a Culture of Compliance. My name is Laura Stotesbury and I am the Head of Marketing here at Waterford Technologies, and I'm going to be the moderator for today's session. So before we go into too much detail, I just want to give you a quick overview of the logistics of today's session. So today's session will be between 30 minutes and 45. We will be taking all questions at the end of the session just to allow for time. So today's session deals with how to harness your unstructured data to drive organizational change and data protection awareness. So data compliance and management has become a key requirement for businesses in today's economy. In the digital age, companies are responsible for an increasing amount of data, both of their customers as well as their own employees. Compliance is a challenging part of doing business today, and proving unstructured data compliance isn't an easy task. Our solutions allow the business to stay ahead of data regulatory shifts with compliance solutions that are easy to manage and implement. So without further ado, I'm going to hand you over to today's speakers. So today we have Gary White, our data protection specialist at Waterford Technologies, and joining him is James Stapleton, our data management specialist. So Gary, I'm going to pass it over to you now to go through today's agenda.
Thanks, Laura, and welcome everybody to today's session. As Laura just introduced, I'm a data protection specialist. So I work with Waterford Technologies as a CIPPE, which is a Certified Information Privacy Professional for Europe. So that basically allows me to help organizations advise around regulations for compliance and data protection. So everything from GDPR, MiFID II, through to CCPA, FOI and FOIA in the US. So I'm just going to run through the agenda here for today and what we're going to cover off. So number one, how are you affected by data regulation? So what we are seeing, I've mentioned some of the regulations that are covered. In Europe, it's GDPR. In the US, it's currently CCPA for California. But what we are seeing is, regardless of your location, there is regulations either coming online or about to come online in the very near future. What we have seen is the likes of the regulations issued by South Africa, Australia, Japan, Brazil, that they're all pretty much using GDPR as the blueprint to start off. So data regulations, regardless of your location, regardless of your territories, are going to be affected by regulations at some point in time in the future. We're going to look today at what is referred to as the Wild West of unstructured data. So I'll go through what the definition of unstructured data is in a moment, but it's pretty much an apt description to call it the Wild West, because it's such a sprawl of data across your organization and across your locations. We're then going to look at the cost of data non-compliance. So what is the potential impact to your business, both from a reputational and from a financial aspect? Then we look at how to automate data management. So the reality of it is that data regulations are a necessary requirement for every business now at the moment. But that doesn't stop the need to have your other day job in place as well and to work away. So the best and easiest way to manage that is by putting automated data management systems in place. We'll also look at moving to the cloud. So basically ensuring your data is safe. So there's a huge move over the last number of years towards public cloud providers, so Amazon, Azure and the like. And it's how you can do this as a business, but protect yourself to the best of your capabilities, and make sure that that migration process and that step or journey for your business is protected. Then we'll look at how do you need to keep all of your data. So the ICO in the UK have just released some regulations around this about data minimization, and we've seen it in different regions around the world as well. So it's not so much of what you're doing with the data, it's the necessary, do you necessarily have to have that data? And if you remove data, that obviously has a knock-on effect to the likes of backup costs and historical license, obsolete or redundant licenses. We'll go through some case studies. My colleague James will go through those in a little bit more detail. And then we'll give you a quick overview of how we help companies all around the world meet their data protection and data compliance needs. So, unstructured data. Unstructured data, probably the easiest and best way to define this is we qualify unstructured data as file and email data. Structured data would be more towards the line of your payroll, CRM systems, finance packages. So, by the very nature of the description as a structured data, that means that they can be interrogated, you can locate information, and you can export information. Unfortunately, unstructured data, because of its name, means that it's very, very difficult to interrogate it, locate data, export, or delete that data. Now, as I said, because we're talking about file and email here, if you just think of your own organization, the amount of email traffic that comes in and out of your organization every single day, and then accumulate that over a very long period of time, 10, 15, 20 years. If you then add in file data into this, you're talking about every Word, Excel, JPEG, marketing department information, every file that's ever created is sitting there on your system in an unstructured format, which means you can't interrogate it, locate, and move that data. File and email, based on typical from our experience and based upon research from Gartner, takes up approximately anywhere from 70 to 80% of all the data held within your organization. So we'll break that down very, very quickly. If you think of your organization, a small organization now would have 10 terabytes of data. That's a very, very small amount of data in modern terms. If we were to equate that just to files, that's approximately 10 to 12 million files. Now, if you're looking to locate a piece of information or a PII or a subject access request or an FOIA where you're looking for one succinct piece of information, you have to interrogate 12 million files. If we go into emails, an organization with 200 or 300 staff over a 10-year period could have anywhere from 100 to 150 million emails with attachments, with Excel, with CVs, with banking details, with credit card information, with so much information contained within it. So the ComplyKey portal, which James will go through in a little while, will just show you how you can basically structure your unstructured data so that you can locate data, you can manage it, you can monitor it. And the monitor is very important here. That's the proactive approach to monitoring your data. It's not just reactive, that I have to find information and I have to move it somewhere, but how do I implement policies so that I can have this proactively going on in the background? And you protect your data and you minimize. So as I mentioned earlier with the ICO, minimization of data is one of the biggest impacts and biggest parts that all regulatory authorities are going to be looking at. And then finally, DSAR. Now this could lend itself to an FOI, an FOIA, or whatever version of the regulation, whatever region you are in. It is basically the fundamental rights of all of these compliance regulations now is that any individual has the capability or the regulation and legal authority to ask and receive their information that pertains to them. So, sorry, I just jumped ahead to one thing. So, why we need help with unstructured data? So, we have 4 headings here: cost, location, structure, and time. Cost is probably one of the biggest impacts to an organization from a management point of view straight away. So, just jumped ahead there. We'll jump back. Second. Okay, sorry. So, why we need help with unstructured data? We have 4 headings here: cost, location, structure, and time. So, cost is obviously a big impact on any organization. And as I mentioned previously, email and file is that unstructured database with a huge amount of data within it. So it is the cost impact of having to meet regulatory requirements and search and interrogate that data. It's a hugely expensive price to any organization of having to bring in e-discovery specialists or external specialists to locate specific pieces of information across your organization. Location, as I've already mentioned, approximately anywhere up to about 80% of all the data is held within email and file. Again, just think of how much personal identifiable information is contained within that information. Structure. So, email and file systems, we've already covered. There is no out-of-the-box system to allow you to interrogate these types of data. They were designed as communication tools, not as storage tools, and they were certainly never designed with the idea of being able to locate small pieces or large quantities of information in an easy traceable format. And then time. So obviously, as we said, the example I've given earlier is a small organization could have anywhere between 10 and 12 million files. Then we get into emails, into the tens of hundreds of emails. That's not even including the historical nightmare that is PSTs, or in the newer version with Office 365, shared mailboxes. So PSTs are systems that have been used as a dumping ground in the past by end users and IT departments to take lots of information, put it into a folder and push to a location. They don't fall under your DSAR search because they could be sitting anywhere on their network. They're open to corruption. With the shared mailboxes, you don't have the ability to set retention periods. You don't have the ability to set legal hold. You have size of mailbox size limits, and each time a new message comes into those shared mailbox, one is pushed out the back end. Obviously, all of this impacts your audit trail capability and your compliance and data protection. But again, it all comes back to this time management. How much time are people within your organization wasting looking for information that could be done in a much more proactive, managed way? So, the effects of data regulation. What we have seen recently from a number of different reports around the world is as high as 82% of respondents say that they would boycott a company if they demonstrated poor regard for protecting customer data. So, in reality, what does this mean? It's not just the regulatory impact of getting a fine. We're all aware of the GDPR 4% or 20 million, and in the CCPA, the fines that are going to be regulated against that. But it's potentially the reputational damage to your organization by having a breach, or not even necessarily just having a breach, but having bad practices in place which demonstrate to your clients and your customers that you aren't managing their data. And data is one of the most valuable resources in the world at the moment because it influences every decision for your customers, both from their voting rights all the way through to their spending habits, and how and what they're going to do and will they deal with you going forward. 1 terabyte of unstructured data equals 9 months. So what does that mean? As I said, a small organization would have anywhere from 10 terabytes up. Gartner estimates that if you were to interrogate 1 terabyte of unstructured data, so file or email, it would take approximately 9 months to physically go through and eyeball or look for or find those pieces of information. Under GDPR, you have 30 days to respond to DSAR. Under CCPA, you have 45 days, which is a little bit better, but still nowhere kind of near your 9 months. Now multiply that by 10 or whatever amount of data your organization has. The next point here we see is 2/3 of organizations aren't prepared to report the type of information that's been violated under a data breach. So one of the big things with data regulation, you can only protect your data to a certain point in time. There is always going to be the potential for a breach or for data protection loss. The important aspect here is being able to identify quickly and to be able to respond and notify the relevant regulatory authority as soon as possible about the type of data that was lost. multitudes of data can be lost, and not all of it is damaging from a reputational or from a cost impact or from a compliance point of view. So in other words, if I lose data and it turns out it's the information about the printer and what prints it's done in the last few days, that's not necessarily as bad as losing a customer sheet with bank account numbers, obviously. Reputational damage and fines, I've already covered this. So the fines, what we are starting to see in the European Union is smaller fines, in the sense of not those 20 million figures, but what we are starting to see is fines of 100,000, 20,000, 50,000. These are currently, at the moment, you've all seen the news for the likes of the Marriott and British Airways, plus Google and these guys. But in Ireland alone, there's 18 ongoing investigations. Once these major investigations are out of the way, they're going to start coming down into the more enterprise level and SME sector, and they will be issuing fines based upon how proactive you've taken your steps around data protection and compliance. The right to be forgotten. So this is one of the core principles of GDPR. It will be of CCPA, and again, as I mentioned, all around the world. So it's not only the fact that I have the ability to locate my data, have it presented to me in a reasonable format, but I also have the ability now to request for that data information to be deleted. Again, in structured data, that's quite easy. In unstructured data, that is very, very difficult to do. Next point, policy needs to turn into practice. So with all the events we attend, and with all the seminars we talk at, and with all the people we talk to, and all the data protection specialists we talk to all around the world, the one thing we are seeing is when GDPR first came into force, everybody rushed to put out privacy policies or cookie notices and so on and so forth. We'll see the same in the US with the CCPA, and we'll see it all around the world. But once that first impact of the high-ticket items has been done, what you really need to do, and what all the regulatory authorities are going to need to see, is that you've moved beyond that, that now you're putting policies into practice. So you've said something on your privacy policy, something simple like we retain data for X amount of years. Now you have to demonstrate that you're actually doing that. You're retaining data for that period of time. You are deleting data. You're constantly monitoring your data. So again, if I go back to the ICO, because the report just came out this week, they're talking about data minimization, but what they actually recommend with a research that they've done into 50 councils in the UK was that they should have the ability to, as they refer to it, spring clean their data. So it's not just do that the first time, it's constantly have the ability to go back and search and interrogate data to make sure that you're putting in proactive practices. FOIA. So this is a huge impact, again, worldwide. So in Europe it's referred to as FOI, and in the US it's FOIA. This gives organizations an absolute headache when it comes to that unstructured data. So again, how do I find specific pieces of information pertaining to an individual or a conversation or a contract and present that out in that timely manner of 30 days or 45 days, depending on the region. So the cost of data non-compliance. We have a few points here which we've broken down into size because as how we see them as the potential impact cost-wise. So the cost of diagnosing the source or the loss of breach. So, as I said, you've had that breach. But really what you have to do is you have to notify your regulatory authority within 72 hours that you've had a breach, but you need to understand what you've lost. It's not good enough just to say I've lost data. You need to be able to break down and implement and separate out what exactly you have lost. Is it hugely damaging to the organization, to individuals, or is it non-business critical, non-relevant information? Recovery plan implementation. So, once you've had an issue, once you've had a breach, how do you go about setting up, making sure that you will never have this issue again, or how do you put in the proper technical measures? So again, that goes back to our start point here. The proactive approach is the way to start. If you take a proactive approach to it, you will be demonstrating that you're making the best measures and implementing the best measures to look after your data. Litigation costs. This is now becoming such a huge issue. The cost of litigation is going through the roof. It's always been quite high, but it's now going through the roof because legal firms are seeing the ability to make a lot of money out of these scenarios. And they're actually going out and representing and placing FOIAs and DSARs on behalf of clients purely for the way of generating revenue. If we think of, I think they were referred to as ambulance chasers in the past, this is the new ambulance chaser. Data is the new ambulance chaser for certain legal firms. Lost time, again, so as we said at the beginning, everybody has their day job that they have to get onto. If you have an investigation, a DSAR, an FOIA, how much time, how many staff are involved in that? The cost of the business can't be equated, because usually what you're going to be using here is high-level executives or managers within your organization to run searches and to find breaches and to take proactive steps, and you're losing them from their day job and the cost of those. E-discovery costs, quite different from litigation costs, but an e-discovery cost for an organization, an external organization, to come in and do that general e-discovery against your unstructured data. And what I mean by general, I mean is, again, we'll take that 10 terabytes as an example. If it's a subset of data that you're looking at for an FOIA or for a DSAR, most of the time what we find is that that information can be drilled down to quite a small subset of data. If you don't have a solution in place to give you the ability to provide or present that subset of data, those e-discovery costs rise dramatically, because you're interrogating 10 terabytes as opposed to maybe 10 gigabytes of data. As you can imagine, the cost is priced per gig for e-discovery costs, so if you're getting into 10 terabytes, it's huge. Notification costs. Again, notification costs are going to be in line with your litigation and your e-discovery. So going out and presenting out to the relevant data protection authority, but also having to go out and demonstrate to the people that you've lost the information belonging to. So contacting every single individual to let them know that you've lost some of their data. So consider, a basic Excel sheet could have anywhere from 5 to 5,000 of your customers' information on it. 5,000 people you have to contact personally and individually and notify them that you've lost their data. That obviously goes straight into the next one, which is reputational damage. So the reputational damage here is what we're seeing as potentially the biggest impact on the organization. Fines are fines, and you can insure against fines. You cannot insure against reputational damage. So we work with a lot of insurance firms across Europe and the US, where we help and assist their customers implement our solutions so that they have the best practices in place, which actually reduces the cost of their insurance against data protection and compliance loss. No insurance company can or will insure against reputational damage purely because it's unquantifiable. How bad was the reputational damage? How much would that impact? Would you lose 82% of your customers? It's astronomical. If you're thinking about your organization with tens of millions or hundreds of thousands of pounds of turnover, the reputational damage could kill your business forever. And regulatory fines, again, I've touched on this. We are starting to see these being released under GDPR, under the Dutch, the Polish, the German, the Spanish, the French, the Irish, the English. All the individual authorities are starting to release small fines out there, 10 and 20,000 pounds, which you're covered under if you have insurance. But again, it doesn't mention the reputational aspect. So what does data regulation require of me? So again, we have 4 headings here. Basically what you're looking at is proper management. So GDPR, CCPA, or whatever version in whatever region you are, basically is saying that these regulations have been in place for a number of years across the world and organizations decided to ignore them. They're now saying organizations don't have a choice. You are collecting so much data about every single individual. So every interaction that your client has with your organization leaves a data point. These data points influence so much and are sold all around the world. So every time you make a transaction with your credit card, that information is shared by your bank with lots of their partners who then get the ability to sell or advertising to you to influence your decisions around your spending habits. It's not good enough anymore to say, oh, we tried. You now have to implement and demonstrate proper compliance around personal data because it is so important. I've just referenced a couple of articles here under GDPR that's relevant. And again, these lend themselves to any articles, but GDPR is what we're more experienced in, so we've referenced those ones there. Prudent storage. Again, proper management is understanding your data and looking after your data, but prudent storage is basically saying, I have data. Why do I have that data? What am I going to do with that data? How long will I retain that data? Do I need that data? And if I don't need that data, I should remove that data. The type of data breached, again, I spoke about this already, the 72-hour notification, but it's understanding what you lost. It's often the most easiest ways that data is lost is by simply emailing the wrong information to the wrong person. So anybody here from the UK today will be familiar that the Tory party's manifesto about a no-deal Brexit was sent to somebody with a similar name in the opposition party. There's a breach that they certainly didn't want. It can simply happen with any end user within your organization attaching a file that contains hugely sensitive information and just simply sending it to the wrong person. So then you need to be able to go back and say, what was sent, who sent it, when was it sent, what did it contain? Individual citizens' rights. So this is really what all these compliance regulations are about. Organizations didn't take proactive steps to manage and protect data, so the different regulatory authorities in the different regions have stepped in and said, we are going to give the rights back to the individual. So again, I want my information, I want to see what you have, and I want to know what you're doing with that data. E-discovery, FOIA, and DSAR. So I've covered a lot of this already, but what we're seeing is GDPR and CCPA basically allow you the access to access that data and request that data. That data, when it's requested, has to be presented in an easy, readable format to the person. The organization then has to be able to say to the person, this is why we keep it, what we're going to do with your data, and what we've done with it in the past. And then the individual has the ability then to request that information to be deleted if it doesn't fall under other regulations. The manpower involved in this is simply unsustainable without a technological solution. It is impossible, as we've mentioned, to interrogate on this quantity of unstructured data. Even if you're a small organization with 100 users or 50 users, the amount of data that you hold, the amount of resource you're going to have to dedicate to this if you have an FOIA, a DSAR, or others. And as again we've mentioned, the negative press, reputational damage. If I was asking you to take anything from this today, and the biggest difficulty that every DPO I speak to, is that when they go to their boards, there's a little bit of fatigue around GDPR and these titles. But when they go back to their board and they're trying to present a solution to help them manage and be proactive about their data, it often falls on deaf ears. It's hard to present that information to them. I would always recommend to every DPO go in and just ask the board or the management level to think about the potential impact from a reputational point of view to their organization. So I'm not going to go into detail in this sheet here because I will bore everybody to death, but as you can see, this is just a quick comparison of some of the regulations under CCPA and under GDPR which cross over. So, you know, the definition of personal info, it's pretty much, again, they've taken very much similar rules and regulations that GDPR have implemented. So we've already drawn attention to, under GDPR, it's 30 days to respond, under CCPA, it's 45 days. The right to deletion applies to everybody. The right for business content information to be brought forward and presented, and then the potential fines that can be implemented by the individual data protection regulatories. So I'm now going to bring you over to how it works, and I'm going to hand you over to my colleague James. James is our data specialist, and he works with some of our more high-profile clients. So James will bring you through how our solutions help with some of the points I've just covered. Over to you, James.
Thanks for that, Gary. Hi everyone, my name is James Stapleton and I'm a data management specialist here at Waterford Technologies. So Gary has touched on some of the requirements and challenges that are imposed on us when it comes to complying with the latest data protection regulations in the context of unstructured data. So what I'm going to focus on is looking at some of the key actions and best practice that companies can take to deal with these types of challenges, as well as look at a practical example of where we have helped one of our clients in this regard. So if we break it down a bit further, Waterford Technology specialises in helping organisations to manage their email and file data, or in other words, unstructured data from a compliance point of view. As Gary alluded to earlier, this type of data is where organisations tend to have the most difficulties when it comes to finding personal identifiable information, as there's no database behind it. Okay, so at high level, we can look at this as a three-prong approach. You have this mass sprawl of data with very little visibility over it. So the first thing that you'll need to be able to do is shed some light on it. We can do this by analysing the data to understand the makeup of it, looking at attributes like the oldest, newest, largest, most duplicated files, as well as being able to rapidly and granularly search for data such as personal identifiable information in regards to where it resides in the body of an email, subject line, attachment content, or data across your file servers. As we saw in one of the earlier slides, Gartner states that it would take 9 months to eyeball 1 terabyte of file data. In other words, it's a needle in a haystack situation unless you have something in place. We then look at data management through consolidation of data, setting up automated policies and generally deciding what you want to do with the data. Ultimately, you want to mimic what the database structure gives you, a portal to interrogate and produce that information in a format that you can manipulate, which is very difficult to do natively in email and file. And this then brings us to data control. As mentioned, the ability to manipulate data such as applying labels for data categorization, applying action tags, deleting data when required, i.e. the right to be forgotten, applying legal hold on specific emails or mailboxes for legally discovery cases, access block tag capabilities, also setting up proactive compliance plans, as well as implementing the appropriate retention policies for your data based on your organization's requirements. So data analysis, data management, and data control, with every step having a detailed audit trail and in-depth reporting. So if anyone has viewed a message or taken actions such as applying labels or tags or deleting mails or exporting, every step has an audit trail and reports with detailed insights into productivity and usage trends across the organization. Okay, if you remember in one of the earlier slides, we referenced some of the key aspects or questions that organizations need to ask themselves when it comes to unstructured data. So typically when we work with clients on these types of projects, we want to uncover areas such as, can you locate your data? Can you manage your data? Can you monitor it? Can you protect it? Do you have the ability to minimize it? And can you quickly and efficiently fulfill the requirements of an FOIA, e-discovery, or data subject access request? If you can't answer yes to all these questions, then this is potentially an issue for you, especially when the reality of an FOIA or DSCR request comes in. Or indeed, if you are lucky enough to have maybe multiple requests come in at the same time. Obviously, searching for PII information across your structured databases, such as HR systems or maybe CRMs, it might be cumbersome exercise, but it's a walk in the park compared to searching across email and file unstructured data. Hence, the reference to the Wild West of GDPR is unstructured data in an earlier slide. So if we drill a bit further into these, locate. No matter how big or small you are as an organization, the first thing that you need to be able to do with confidence is know the location of any personal data. If you don't have an ability to find this information, then you are hitting a roadblock straight away. So ask yourself the question, if someone contacts your organization requesting information under Freedom of Information or Subject Access request, can you locate that information across all your data sets? And also, how quickly can you do that when you consider the multiple types of data across multiple servers, whether they're on-premise or in the cloud, or potentially across multiple geographic locations? Manage. So for the data that you hold in your organization, you need to ensure that you have an easy way to manage this insofar as being able to find, present, and then take particular actions. All searches performed by our solution are done in real time, so the results are returned directly to the end user. So there's no need to submit a search and then have to wait to be notified when the search has been completed, or to have to download the results of the search to a PST. It's all available straight away. Based on your search results, you can then take actions such as the ability to delete information if requested, applying legal hold in the event of an investigation or a court case, implementing retention policies, or the ability to present information to a data subject in an appropriate format. All of this helps demonstrate that you are managing and conforming to data protection regulation requirements. Okay, so moving on to monitor. So as well as managing, you also need to monitor on an ongoing basis that you are not holding private data unnecessarily, and that you can track, manage, and remove this information. We can provide the ability to set up a framework of compliance plans to evaluate messages in the archive using compliance-focused criteria that you control. Okay, so messages that meet these criteria are identified, and then they can be reviewed by your compliance team to see if they are a violation. There are many use cases where this can be invaluable, such as flagging GDPR or CCPA sensitive terms, inappropriate word usage, etc. And if we go further than this, we can also enable message filtering to define early detection pre-archiving rules that can discard, tag, or label messages based on message participants, message type, or keyword content in the message to control archive content. Identify compliance violations and assist message analysis. So, for example, discarding spam emails such as newsletters, discarding out-of-office replies, maybe flagging when credit card information is being sent over email, applying tags or labels for possible GDPR violations. So it's quite powerful. If we move on to protect, can you demonstrate that you have the appropriate data protection and best practice in place for your data? Can you demonstrate that data is encrypted and that only personnel with the appropriate privileges have access to this data? We provide the ability to encrypt data in transit and at rest and create split volumes so that can be stored in different locations, again with audit trails of any actions taken. And then minimize. So, minimize is one of the more important parts of data protection legislation out there. You should be able to justify why you're holding on to personal data, as Gary alluded to earlier. Applying retention policies is obviously an important part of this, as is the right to be forgotten. However, in order to be able to minimize your data, you need to have the ability to first locate, interrogate the data that you have, and to give the visibility required to take the actions needed to reduce your data footprint. Again, this is particularly difficult to do with unstructured data. However, we provide the tool set to reduce time and complexity involved in this type of activity. So, in summary, how Waterford Technologies helps. So, obviously, we can help around the governance. We take proactive approach with the use of pre-filtering so that you can categorize your data before it's archived. We can help ensure that you are flagging any inappropriate activity within your email system that might put your organization at risk. As discussed, powerful advanced e-discovery to make sure that you can find what you need when you need it to help meet the compliance requirements of FOIA and GDPR. Automating data management across both your email and file, and increasing efficiency so that you can focus on your core business activities. Create your own custom word list based on what's important to you as a business, as well as setting regular expressions to identify sensitive credit card information in your email data, always assisting with PCI compliance. And also the manipulation of data, delete, retention policies, legal hold, access block, everything that is required within a modern email and file compliance solution. So finally, I just want to touch on a practical example of where we helped a now customer of ours in their email and file challenges last year. This particular customer is based in the UK, is in the public sector, and the issues that they came to us about were that they were looking to migrate from an on-premise email platform to Microsoft Office 365. They also had a lot of file data across multiple servers that they had very little visibility over. So a lot of their initial concerns revolved around cost, complexity, and timeframes for such a project, and they wanted to see how we could help with that. So when we sat down with them to discuss this further, some of the areas that they highlighted to us were the legal investigations were on the rise, and this was something that was of concern to them. They also felt that they did not have proper processes in place appropriate resources in place even to manage a freedom of information or subject access request. And so they wanted to have a system in place that would perform searches in a timely manner, and in particular across their unstructured data, which was a big issue for them. They were also conscious that they had data going back years in their file system, which was continuing to grow. And although they suspected that, probably a lot of this was redundant data, they had no visibility over what was important data versus what was not. As a result, costs were increasing as all the data had to be managed and it all had to be backed up. Another cost concern had revolved as well around migrating to Office 365, as they didn't want to have to bring all of their redundant legacy data over. They were also concerned about the complexity of managing compliance within Office 365, as well as the costly license add-ons that would be required. And they wanted to explore using us as their specialist FOI and GDPR compliant tool set to manage their unstructured data. So, the overall solution involves the following. We carried out an in-depth analysis of their file servers to give their visibility required to understand the makeup of their data. They were then able to identify 20% of their data that could be deleted straight away as it had no business value. So effectively 2 terabytes of data removed within the first 24 hours, which had an immediate impact. Of remaining data, we then set up a policy to archive cold data to less expensive storage, fully encrypted. This left them with 4 terabytes of active data, down from 10 terabytes. We also implemented content indexing across all the data in their file servers, enabling their DPO to granularly search their data in the event of an FOI or DSAR. And then on the email side, we ingested all their mailbox content into a compliant repository that could then be searched for future investigations. And this also reduced the time required for migration, as they were only bringing over active mailboxes to Office 365. So in summary, the outcomes achieved were, the file footprint was greatly reduced, which, in turn reduced the cost of managing the data. They also now had FOI and DSAR availability across their email and file data. Office 365 only had the relevant mailboxes, and they then implemented a retention policy of 2 years on their email platform, as ultimately, Office 365 is a communication platform, it's not a storage location. And they used our solution as their compliant repository going forward then. Okay, so I'll leave it there. I hope you found this session useful and that you have a good understanding of the types of challenges that we can help with through our software, as well as the in-house expertise that we have. Thanks for taking the time to join, and I will now hand you back to Laura.
So thank you, James and Gary, for taking part in today's webinar. I hope everybody found it very insightful. We're really close to the 45 minutes now, so we're just going to finish up with a few questions that have come through. If we don't get to all the questions, we apologise, but we will make sure that we respond via email to everybody. And a copy of this recording will be sent out after the webinar as well. So just one question that came in. We already have Office 365 for our compliance needs. So I think, Gary, I'll give this one to you.
Okay, no problem. So if you have Office 365, that's excellent. That's great. It's a fantastic communication tool. We use it ourselves, but it's not a great compliance solution or a storage solution. So a couple of the questions you need to ask yourselves there are: do you have split licenses? So what I mean by that is there's different enterprise licenses. So E1, E3, E5. If you have a split with, say, the vast majority of your end users are on E1, and typically a company will do that to save costs. But basically, you have no control over compliance because there's no retention set on that. There's no management built into it. There's no legal hold. And what this basically means, going back to the topics we covered already, is that you're letting end users make business-critical compliance decisions for your organization. On the other side, you may have E3 and E5, and if you have E3, you're still not covered. Basically, Microsoft have seen that this is a gap and understand that it's a gap that they have to fill, so they've created an add-on solution called Advanced Compliance. Now, with Advanced Compliance, it's added to every single mailbox, and depending on your region, it's quite expensive on top of an E3 license. You're probably, by the time you add in all the different bits and pieces, you're getting up somewhere around $45 to $50 per mailbox when you add in all the components. So MailMeter is an alternative to the Advanced Compliance solution. MailMeter is hugely more cost effective, but it gives you it's a compliance solution that's designed from the ground up to be a compliance solution. So it allows you to sit on top of E1, E3, E5. It's a fraction of the cost. It gives you more functionality, gives you better audit trail capabilities, and it sits across all mailboxes. So as I mentioned at the beginning, in Office 365, pushing data to shared mailboxes is a bad idea because they have data limits and data gets pushed out. And you have no audit trail, you don't have legal hold unless you add Advanced Compliance to that as well. So in summary, Office 365 is a fantastic solution. It's a fantastic communication solution. It doesn't meet your compliance needs unless you put in the Advanced Compliance solutions, and even then there is some drawbacks to it. But one of the biggest things to look at is the cost impact to your organization. Hope that helps.
That's great. Thanks, Gary. We're just going to squeeze in one last question. So this question comes in: we know where all our data resides, so how can Waterford Technologies help? James, I'll pass that one to you.
Yeah, well, look, I suppose, this would be, obviously people would feel they know where their data resides and where it is. It's always going to be one of the bigger challenges when it comes to unstructured data, however. Because obviously you'll know where your structured data is, and it's easy to find it and look for it. With the unstructured data, that's always going to be a bigger challenge. So there's two elements, I suppose. There's having the visibility over your unstructured data, so that you have an understanding of the makeup of it from a data management point of view. And of course, there's the other elements then of being able to actually find specific information from a compliance point of view then. So if you needed to do searches across that information, can you actually do that? Because if you don't have something in place, because it's unstructured, you're going to run into those difficulties from a compliance point of view. As we've mentioned earlier in the call and around the stats from Gartner, it's always going to be the issue. And a lot of people don't think of that when people think about that they know where the data is. They're thinking probably more so in relation to their structured databases. Okay, so hope that's helpful.
That's great. Thanks again, Gary and James. I'm sorry we don't have any time for any more questions because we've just gone over the 45 minutes. So I'd like again to thank everybody for joining us today, our speakers, Gary and James, and we will be following up with the recording of the webinar, so please feel free to send it on to any of your colleagues. If you wish to get in touch, please email sales@waterfordtechnologies.com or ring any of the relevant numbers on the screen right now. So thanks again, and we look forward to having you on our next webinar. Bye-bye.